Mollie, thank you very much for joining me on the Outside and Active podcast. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. You have just travelled down from Edinburgh. We're in Birmingham at the National Snow Show. You are speaking later. Excited, nervous, looking forward to it?
No, totally. It's awesome to be down here in Birmingham. This is the first time I've come to the snow show. I just had a quick look around this morning and it's epic. There's so many different stands, so many different people to chat to.
The energy of the snow industry is amazing.
Isn't it?
It's so cool. Like everyone from speakers to brands, the visitors all kind of bundle in all as one. They love just having a good time. And it's good fun.
It's different to other, I guess I have my foot in lots of different outdoor industries, and definitely snow sports is different. The energy is there. People are here for a good time.
Absolutely.
Different industries are a bit more serious, but no, I'm enjoying the vibe today.
Good. Well, you can explore in a bit, but for now, we're here to chat about you, your adventures, your story, and inspire some people that will be listening to this. We start the podcast with something every time, and it's a piece of advice that a guest from a previous episode will leave for you, unbeknowing they don't know who it's going to be to. But your piece of advice is from Laura Crane, who is a surfer, snowboarder, adventurer, model, reality TV star as well. And her advice to you is to listen to the heart and not the head. So the question that kind of leads on from that is, do you find that you're an impulsive person with these adventures, or are you quite measured and quite calculated with them?
Yeah, I love that advice. And that's something I definitely try and do throughout life. I think with the adventures that I've done, you've got to follow your heart at the beginning, and you've got to really want it, and you've got to really want to visit this place and be in this environment. But then when you're there, that's when you've got to start using your head. Because if you don't, and you follow your heart too much in those environments, that's when things can go wrong.
Definitely.
So a little bit of both, I think, is always good.
I like that. Nice. And another staple question that we have, what do you love about being outside and active?
Oh my God, what a big question.
I know. We'll be here for the next few hours.
I know, everything. I think it's more than just, enjoying the different sports I do. I think it's something that I need these days. And I think maybe lockdown and COVID taught me even more that being stuck inside is not a good place for me. So I need these big open spaces. And there's so many around the world to enjoy and explore.
And you have explored them. And we will go into a couple of those adventures, because reading up about it and seeing your story, it's incredible. It's amazing, some of the adventures that you've been on. But I'm really interested to know how you get into it. Where did you grow up? How did you get into exploring the outdoors, not just the ones that are on your doorstep, but actually these crazy adventures that you will talk about in a bit?
Yeah, I mean, so I live in Scotland now, and I have done for almost the last decade. So Scotland's definitely home. But originally, I grew up on the south coast of Devon, a little place called Torbay, super touristy little seaside resort place. So as far from any mountains as you can kind of imagine. But quite an outdoorsy lifestyle. Being by the sea, we did a lot of surfing, a lot of kayaking, a bit of rock climbing, lots of hiking up in Dartmoor. So as a youngster, definitely out there doing stuff with my parents, who also love the outdoors. The big expeditions really started when I was 17. And my school was kind of organising this charity expedition to go to East Africa and to do some kind of charity work out there, and then climb this beautiful mountain called Mount Kenya in Kenya. Yep. And I managed to raise all the money, bag packing in supermarkets, going to car boot sales, got all the money together eventually, and then head off to Kenya and climb Mount Kenya. And I think that's the moment that really ignited my interest in travel and a bit about high altitude as well.
And were you travelling with other people as well, that you were doing it at the same time as you? Was it kind of like a group thing?
It was a group from school. So lots of people, 16, 17-year-olds, mostly girls from my school. And it was really, really cool. My school is I don't imagine it is, but it's quite a reasonably challenged school.
Right, okay.
So people from my school had never really travelled that much. So it's amazing to get us all there in East Africa, where the culture is so different to what it is in our seaside resort in Devon.
Definitely.
Super eye-opening, I think, for all of us.
And how do you go from that, what would you have been, 16, 17, sort of, to then, would it have been 4 years later?
Yep, 4 or 5 years later. Summiting
Everest.
Yeah.
That's quite a jump. I mean, Mount Kenya is obviously no mean feat, but the world's tallest mountain, what are the steps in that 4 years?
It was a quick turnaround.
Really?
Sure. So the ambition wasn't there for the first few years. And I guess the first few years, as I went through school and uni, I just wanted to travel. And I wanted to climb different mountains and experience different cultures and different parts of the world. So in term time, I would get jobs, save up as much money as I could, spend my student loan, and then as soon as that long summer comes that you get at uni, I'd head off with a group of friends and travel to different places, climb mountains in the Himalayas in South America, back to Africa a couple of times, to the Atlas and East Africa, to the Alps. So I just did as much as I could in that time, just enjoyment and having fun with friends. But the idea for Everest came in my final year at uni, because I was studying sports psychology. And at the end of uni, you have to do your big project, dissertation, 10,000 words about any subject you want within sports psychology.
Yeah.
And I'm not the most academic person in the world, so I knew it had to be something super interesting for me to actually like commit to it and write about it. So I decided to investigate the psychological experience of climbing Mount Everest. And I had this interest in Everest because it's the highest mountain in the world, it's the most famous mountain in the world. And I kind of thought that people's psychology going into those expeditions must be really interesting. Like it's so much more than anything else. And that's what I did. I interviewed 7 guys who'd all summited.
Oh, wow. And what were the findings?
That's true.
Did they go through a lot?
The paper, very amateur, like I was 21, not that academic, but it was like a qualitative study, which meant I could just look at different people's opinions.
I like that. That's a good idea.
Super broad, I guess.
No numbers, just
no
feeling.
numbers, no stats. But I guess what I learned was that all of these people had very different experiences, but there were a few kind of themes that ran through it. Things like needing a super strong motivation, and some of them had different ones. Like for some of them, it had been a childhood ambition that they'd worked towards for such a long time. Some of them had just been a group of friends that got together and said, "Okay, do you want to come on this trip? We're going to try and climb Everest." So different motivations, but they always had to be pretty strong. But I think the main thing I learned from the project that probably served me with all of my expeditions was that you need to be super pragmatic about everything you do. Never focusing on the summit, just focusing on the day ahead of you, and even breaking that down smaller and focusing on the next hour ahead of you, or the next few steps ahead of you, and not getting like psychological pressure from the bigger picture or the bigger goal. So really breaking everything down, which has helped.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's interesting you said the motivation. Where does your motivation come from to go on these different adventures, and where's that? It's almost like an itch, isn't it, to do something new or different or bigger?
I mean, it's a good question. I think it's changed a lot. So I guess I've been doing these, I'm 32 now. I did Everest the first time when I was 21. So over a decade of doing these kind of expeditions. And it's totally changed throughout it. I think the first time I wanted to do it, I had studied Everest for so long, and it was so interesting. I just wanted to see it with my own eyes. But I also wanted to kind of prove to myself that I could do something, because I think I was pretty shy at school and at uni. And I never really shouted about myself or things I've done or wanted to do. But I kind of felt like I didn't want to be this shy person. I wanted to gain some kind of confidence, which probably isn't a good excuse to go and climb Everest, but I think it was like underlining it all.
I mean, there's some other things you could do, but climbing Everest will achieve that,
So, that's what I did.
Just to give people some context of, you're not just someone who has summited Everest. You are the youngest woman in the world and the first English woman to successfully summit from the north and south side. Now, the first thing that, when I say that and people hear that comes to my head is, that's incredible, that's amazing, that's a young age to be going out and doing that. The second thing is, there's a north and a south side that people go up. My ignorant head would have thought, oh, there's just one path being a very, scaling it down a little bit, but one route that people go up, but there's a north and a south side. So the question there is, what's the difference between the north and the south side?
Yep. So there's actually loads of different routes that people do. Like maybe over 20 that people have done. The two main ones that people do are the north and the south side. So most people that climb Everest will go on either of these routes. The south side is busier. It's on the Nepalese side of the mountain. The north side is on the Tibetan side of the mountain. The south side is a little bit busier. It's got different obstacles, different dangers, different challenges. The north side is the side that I did the second time. And that's thought to be much colder, which it was. It's windier because it's on that north side of the mountain. And it's more of a technical summit day. So you're scrambling, climbing over big kind of rock structures on narrow ridge lines. And you spend longer on the north side, above 8,000 meters, in that place it's called the death zone, where there's hardly any oxygen.
It's a nice name for a part of a mountain, yeah.
For sure, somewhere you want to go and hang out.
Yeah.
So the north side, I would say, is harder. It's more of an undertaking, but it's less popular, so you don't as much get the big queues and lots of people there.
So you summited it once from which side was it first?
So the
south side first,
yeah.
when you were 21.
Yeah.
And then 26,
Yep.
you then go from the north side.
Yep.
Climbing Everest is something that whatever percentage of the population of the world will do, it's not a high amount. But why do it twice? Was it thinking, oh, well, I could have this record to my name? It's something that I want to go, oh, I just want to do it twice. Why more than once?
So I didn't know about the record until actually we got off the mountain.
Oh, really?
I think I was going to be the first English woman. I didn't know about being the youngest.
Yeah.
So it was quite a cool surprise when we got back to Kathmandu. But I went back for the mountain, I think, for a number of reasons. The south side when I was 21 was incredible. It was an amazing 2 months we spent on the mountain, but unbelievably hard. Like, I suffered every second of every day on that mountain, from the altitude, from the pressure, from the physical exertion. It was so much, and there was quite tricky around the summit day. There was lots of people. It was kind of the first year where you got the crowds heading for the summit that we've seen more and more over the last few years. So it's tricky. A lot of people got into trouble that year, and it was amazing. And I feel so lucky to have spent the time, but it was absolute sufferfest.
Really?
So when I got home, I didn't want to see another mountain again for a little while. But then the thought of the north side was always there in my head. Of the guys I interviewed in my dissertation, half did the south side and half did the north side. So I felt like I knew it a little bit from interviewing these guys. The route was so different. The routes are, it's almost like being on a different mountain, because they're in different countries, completely different as you go up, and the only place you meet is right on the summit.
Wow.
And I always felt like I wanted to experience this side of the mountain, go back and see Everest in a slightly different light, and maybe, I don't know, do it in a slightly better style, maybe less suffering, and try and actually enjoy it.
And you would have learned a lot more, I suppose, in that 5 years as well.
Absolutely. I was definitely, like, 5 years a better mountaineer. I'd climbed many more places around the world. I had a really amazing team on the north side, and yeah, I'm so glad I did go back for it.
Quantifying the cold, it's minus 35 degrees at times.
Yeah.
Can you prepare for that? Or is it just when you get to that point, obviously it gradually gets colder and colder, but is it like, oh, I have not experienced this type of cold before?
Yeah. You know what, the cold isn't too bad on Everest.
Okay, nice.
I know it sounds
I
bad.
like that.
So
Just walk in the park.
The coldest part is the summit day. And the whole
Right.
expedition comes down to the summit day, or summit night, I should say. Because you leave the final camp usually, well, for me, it was around 8 p.m. So you're starting in the dark, it's pitch black. And that's when you feel the cold the most. But that's when you've also got your massive down suit on, which is like a sleeping bag with arms and legs. You've got your hood up. You're breathing the bottled oxygen, which has a slight warming effect on your body. And you're moving. You're moving incredibly slowly, but you're never really stopping. And you're just kind of thinking and focusing on sunrise. And then when the sun comes up, you warm up a lot more. So the cold wasn't too much of an issue. I'm saying that I got a tiny bit of frostbite in my fingers, so I guess it was a little bit of an issue on the south side. But it was much colder in later expeditions, I'm sure.
Yeah,
we'll talk
we'll
about
go
in a
into.
bit.
Follow a couple of bits about Everest. I think we see a lot more about Everest now. I mean, 14 peaks. You see when NIMS is going up it, and it's almost like a queue. What is climbing Everest really like? Because I think my ignorant head might think, oh, it's just this. There's no one on it, and when it's very infrequent that people go up. But what is it really like?
It's a good question, and I think so many people have ideas of what they think Everest is like. The press always have quite a negative view of it. They always talk about dead bodies and rubbish and queues, which to an extent there are things there, but they also have quite a negative view, I feel, of Everest climbers. And I think the majority of Everest climbers are outdoorsy people that love the environment and the outdoors that they're in, and they want to go and have their chance to spend time on the highest mountain in the world, which is incredible. For me, it was like such an honor to be on the mountain, and every step I took, as much as I was suffering, I was like, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be here. Like, not many people are going to be here and see this. It took a lot of work to get there in terms of raising the sponsorship and training and getting accepted onto a team. So I felt so grateful to be there on this historic mountain where so many stories have played out over the years. So for me, it's an incredibly special place. When you get to the top and you can see the curvature of the earth and you see the shadow of Mount Everest, it's amazing.
Wow, you can literally see, obviously it was clear when you were there, you can see the curvature of the earth, and that feeling must be almost unrivaled.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think the coolest thing for me was the shadow. So you get to the top, if you're doing good time around sunrise. And as the sun comes up behind Everest, it like pushes this shadow of the mountain onto, it's not even on the land, it's like in the atmosphere, probably in the stratosphere, this perfect pyramid shape of the mountain. You don't realize how perfect the mountain is until you see the shadow of it.
That must be beautiful.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing. I caught it out of the corner of my eye and I was like, oh my God, what is that?
Pure natural beauty, like the world in its purity.
It feels like you're in another world. So to me, it's a super special place. I know there's definitely issues on the mountain with overcrowding when you get the small weather windows to the top, and that causes dangerous situations. So there's definitely things going on the mountain, but I don't think that should take away from how incredible it is.
What's the main difference between summiting, climbing up, and then descending?
A lot. It takes a long time to get to the top. So I guess in total it's almost like 5 or 6 weeks.
Wow.
Because you basically go up and down the mountain to acclimatize. So you kind of climb up to Camp 1, come back to base camp where you rest and recover for a few days. Up to Camp 2, back down to rest, all the way up to Camp 3, which is on the south side at like 7,100 meters. So you're close, you can see the summit, but then you come all the way back down and rest again. So that process is to just acclimatize our bodies, get ourselves used to the lack of oxygen. And then you sit tight at base camp and you wait for the weather to be completely perfect. And sometimes you're waiting for a long time. And then when you get your weather window, you head to the top in about 6 days. And when you finally get to the top, the descent happens. And the descent, I think, is probably the most dangerous part.
Really?
It's the quickest. You can get down off the mountain in literally a few days. But you've spent all that time getting to the top. You've been in the death zone for maybe 12 hours. You're psychologically and physically exhausted. So that's when people can make mistakes. And most people, I think, that die on Everest die on the way down. Not the way
Really? That's interesting. I mean, obviously that's interesting, sad, but interesting. But I would have no idea about the acclimatization process of going up step by step. That must be quite frustrating, but almost like, I just want to get up. I feel good.
People always think it's going to be a bit frustrating, but actually you feel rubbish like the whole time.
Altitude, I can imagine, really has an effect.
And like the first time you get to maybe 6,500 meters by Camp 2 is, you get there and your head's banging and you look up at the mountain and you're like, there's no way I'm ever going to get to the top of this mountain another over 2,000 meters. But then the next time you come up, you feel that bit better because your body started working, it started acclimatizing. You can push up to Camp 3. By the time you get to Camp 3, you're like, oh my God, I can't go any further. This is it. But then you come back and then you go for it. So it's incredibly useful for our bodies.
Wow,
yeah.
Amazing. But if that wasn't enough, in 2019, you took on a challenge, an adventure to solo ski from Antarctica to the Geographic South Pole. How far is that? And why did you decide to do this?
So I started at a place called Hercules Inlet, which is an area where the sea ice meets the land mass of the continent. And from that point to the South Pole is just over 700 miles. It's like 1,100 kilometers. And why? It's a good question. I asked myself that a lot when I was on the ice. I was always very interested in Antarctica. It's, again, one of these places that not many people are going to see. It's this vast frozen continent. It's the world's biggest desert, interestingly, because of the lack of rainfall, snowfall. But I was somewhere I'd always wanted to go. But get down there is near impossible unless you're like super, super rich. You can go as a tourist and pay a lot of money to go there and experience it, which was never going to happen for me. So I thought about some different expeditions that I could do, ones that I could hopefully raise the sponsorship for to get me down to Antarctica. And with the sponsorship of these expeditions, it's almost harder to raise the sponsorship than it is to climb Everest or ski to the South Pole.
Yeah.
Unbelievably hard. And you always need a bit of a unique selling point. So I did some research into it, and I realized that if I skied from this point to the South Pole, I'd be the youngest woman to do that. And then you can use that USP to try and attract different sponsors on boards.
I can imagine it being the tough part of these adventures because it, like you said, it's unless you're mega rich and have the time to do it, it takes a lot to train, get there, the cost of everything. So it's obviously very important to get these sponsorships. And how long does it take to kind of build that up before you actually set off?
Years and years.
Really?
And it's full of so much disappointment. You think you've got a good lead and then it doesn't happen. I think the hardest one was Everest the second time to get a sponsorship. Interestingly, it took me like 3 years. I thought I was going to go in 2016 and was like planning for it, trained for it, was almost ready. And the money just didn't come in.
Oh,
so I delayed it for a year. Antarctica, I was leaving in November. 2019, and I got to about September, and I still needed a big chunk. So it was real panic stations then, but we managed to get the money just at the last minute.
Oh gosh, how lucky.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure.
Where does the solo element come from? Is that part of the challenge? Is that what people do, or is it, and just how solo is it?
Yeah, so it's pretty solo.
Yeah.
So I think I wanted to do Antarctica solo. You don't have to, absolutely. There's great teams. You can be guided down there. Go with friends, people you like, which I would do if I went back. But I think I wanted to do it solo because in all of my other expeditions, I'd always had guides, amazing Sherpa guides, but there was always somebody to like defer to. There was always somebody to make the final decision. It was always a conversation, but it was always their final decision, which was cool. Needed on Everest for sure, especially when I was young. But I really wanted to see if I could kind of take on that responsibility myself. And instead of taking a group with me, I wanted to just take myself and see if I could look after myself for the 58 days it took in total. If I could make all the right calls, if I could be as sensible as I possibly could to survive down there.
I mean, that's incredibly brave. And you said it's the most ambitious thing that you've done. Why is it more ambitious than Everest?
I think mostly because of that solo element.
Yeah.
There was no one really to fall back on when I was out on the ice. And your question before was how solo was it, which was a really good question. So there's a logistics team called Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions.
That's amazing. I love
Good
that
name.
Yeah.
Does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
And they're a big American company, and they support the logistics of the expedition. They flew me from the kind of base camp on the edge of Antarctica to my start point, and then each night at 8 p.m. I had to call them, give them my location, and if I needed, there were doctors on the end of the phone that I could talk to. If I got really stuck, they could, hopefully, if the weather was all right, come and rescue me. So there was the backup there, which is absolutely needed down there. But day in, day out, I was, on my own.
And to give some context of the 700 miles, 650 hours of skiing alone, 58 and a half days. Do you get bored? How do you stop yourself from going insane? What just keeps you going? And then time as well. I take it there's obviously a way for you to tell time so you can structure your days, but what's the light sort of split between the 24 hours as well?
So the main trip is so much more psychological than physical. Like physically super hard. Like you're skiing uphill all the way to the South Pole. You're pulling a 105 kilo sled behind you. So super physical over some pretty challenging terrain, deep snow, sastrugi, these big kind of waves. But I think to me it was probably 75% psychological just to go through that day after day, hour after hour. And I think the way I got through that was being really structured. And I guess in normal life, I'm probably not the most structured person. I hope I'm quite laid back. But down there, I knew I had to be. So I'd wake up at the same time each morning, spend 2 hours melting snow and ice for drinking water for the day, cooking, eating breakfast, putting my tent down. Then at 8 a.m., I wanted to be on my skis and moving. And I would ski for an hour and a half. I would stop for a 10-minute break, not a minute longer, not a minute less, where I'd eat and drink. I would ski for another hour and a half. And I'd do that for 10 or 11 hours a day. So I think that structure really helped. At some points when the weather was super bad, you'd just focus on that hour and a half block of skiing. And you think, okay, in an hour and a half, I've got my 10-minute break. I can have a Snickers. I can have a drink. I can relax a minute for 10 minutes. So I think that really helped, having the structure there. Also, your mind goes to weird places.
Yeah.
So like 58 days in total, I didn't really know how sane I'd be at the end. And you need to almost separate your head from your body sometimes. And I think when something becomes so mechanical, that you can do that. I guess a good example is when you're like driving down the motorway and your head's somewhere else and you're just driving in a straight line. And then suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm actually driving here. But you're thinking about all sorts of different things. And that's actually like a slowing of your brain waves. That when something becomes so routine and mechanical that your head can disappear a little bit and start imagining different situations, having different memories, which is what happened. It took a bit of work after like a few weeks, but after a few weeks, when I got used to all the movement, you could just try and lose your head.
I mean, there's so many things that you just said. I mean, the 100 kg sled that you're pulling, which I presume contains all of your food and supplies and everything like that. The food you're eating 4,500 calories a day, which is over twice the amount that basically you should be eating a day. But at the end, you lost 10 kilograms.
Yep.
purely just from the movement, and is it anything to do with?
Movement.
Yeah, gosh, you're just burning so many calories.
Maybe. Yeah, I reckon I was probably burning around 5,000. Wow. It's probably some good calculation we could do. But to lose 10 kilos, I was probably burning 5.5.
I mean, that's some workout. That's that's some weight loss strategy that you probably wouldn't recommend to people. But the kind of reverting back to the monotony of it, of course, skiing, that movement, but also, is there anything to look at in the landscape? Is there a change of anything, or is it just you're moving up one gradual incline with white around you?
So there's not really anything there. And I mean, there's no wildlife at all. People always say, "Did you see penguins?" I didn't see anything. So right in the middle of Antarctica, nothing grows, nothing lives. Not even bacteria grows down there because it's so inhospitable. You don't see much. There's like a few mountains at the beginning, and then halfway there's a small mountain range, and then there's nothing really to the South Pole. So there's nothing like on the horizon. But underfoot, it changes, and it changes quite a lot. Like the whole route is split into degrees of latitude. And the first degree is pretty steep underfoot. It's often pretty wet, deep snow because you're closer to the coast. You then cover a few flatter degrees, and then you get to an area where you've got loads of this sastrugi, where you get steep hills, and on top of each hill is these massive waves in the snow. And some of them can be 6 foot high that you've got to get over, pull your sled over, get down the other side. So underfoot, it changes a lot, but nothing on the horizon. And I guess that the hardest part of the whole trip was right at the beginning, because I had like whiteout conditions for 8.5 days straight.
So just explain what whiteout.
So whiteout is when the visibility comes right down into your face, and you can't see more than about a meter in front of you. So left looks the same as right, and up looks the same as down, and it's just cloud. And it started on day 2 for my expedition, and it stuck on me until day 8.5. So that was the biggest psychological test of just seeing nothing apart from staring down at your compass, hoping you're going in the right direction. That was unbelievably hard.
A very silly question and a very serious and amazing challenge. Did you have a song that was ever stuck in your head for so long? Because in daily life that happens and you're doing other things, but when you're just moving forward, was there something that was stuck in your head?
I think so many. Like I had a bit of music, so I had this really old iPod. There's one where you spin around the wheel.
Yeah.
Had like thousands of songs on it. And I could listen to maybe like an hour or two a day before the batteries got juiced from the cold. But I could only listen to artists that begin with A, because I had to take my glove off to spin the wheel.
You don't want to be taking your glove off.
Don't want to go down to the B's. So I had A. So lots of Adele, Amy Winehouse was there a lot, Arctic Monkeys, AC/DC.
Yeah.
So a lot of those songs, rolling around my head.
And completing that challenge, it was your second world record, youngest woman in the world to make that journey. How was that feeling? Not even when you finished, but I'm interested in that last, when you do you know when you wake up and you think this is going to be the last half day it was? How's that feeling waking up to begin with?
So I think like the night before that, I could have made it to the South Pole, and I saw it on the horizon. It's the first thing you see for a long time. It's this massive like American science base.
Oh, wow.
Actual buildings, all sorts going on there. And it's like slightly elevated. So you see it from, I think it was maybe like 20 nautical miles away.
How many days before can you see it?
So you could do that in a very long day if you wanted to. So maybe a day and a half.
Oh, wow. You could just see it there.
Yeah. And I skied so fast. And I was like, okay, I was thinking so much, am I going to go tonight? Am I going to ski through the night to get there? And I got about 5 nautical miles away. And I just kind of felt this huge amount of like trepidation and almost like fear of getting there. I think because I'd been alone for so long and I'd just been focusing so much on each day. But then at the pole, that kind of signified, well, other people. There'd be people to see and talk to. Then from there, I would be like reintroducing myself to the world, to society, to in a few days' time opening my laptop for emails and social media, and all of that stuff that I hadn't had for 2 months was all there. So I felt this huge amount of trepidation that night. So I just decided to stop. And I camped 5 nautical miles from the pole. I spent one more night alone in Antarctica. Woke up super early that next morning, and I was ready then. I feel like maybe I could smell the breakfast being cooked at the South Pole.
Actually, I would quite like to stop that. But that's really interesting because, again, my people listening to this, my head would probably go, oh, I just want to stop now. I want to get there. I want to stop, relax. But actually, the main issue is this has been 58 days of your life. It now basically becomes norm. You haven't interacted with people at all, if a tiny little bit. seeing people, it's like being in a box for 60 days and then all of a sudden opening the door to people that are going to be wanting to ask you questions, see how you are. It's going to be very overwhelming. So actually, it's obviously the physical element is one thing, but the anxiety of seeing people is another point. So how was it when you then finally got to that point and saw people?
And it was actually amazing. Like when I got into the South Pole, so the logistics company have a small camp just on the outside, and there was like the camp manager, who I know quite well, who was amazing to like have your first hug in a long time. And then there were a few other people who'd been doing similar trips, and they all kind of ended up at the pole at the same time. So there's maybe like 6 or 7 of us there, a few staff, for a couple of days, which was a really nice, slow way to reintroduce, I think, to people. A lot of them had done similar trips before, and they'd just completed one, so they knew exactly what was going on. And we just relaxed for a couple of days. We chatted through things, we drank beer, we just had an amazing time.
But that went straight to your head.
And then from that point, you fly back to the big camp on the edge of Antarctica, where there's maybe, 150, 200 people. So you spend a couple of days there, had my first shower in like 62 days or something.
Wow.
And then from there, I flew back to Chile, where you're in a small city, and then finally back to Scotland. So it was a slow reintroduction, which I think probably helped with my mindset.
How was the food provision? Did you have plenty of food? I imagine that made up quite a lot of the 100 kilograms. And then as the days go on, it gets lighter and lighter. So I guess there's the temptation to try and eat as much food so it's lighter, but also I've got to make sure that I might be out here for 2 months.
Totally. So I think at the beginning, the food was maybe 54 kilograms of food. And it's these kind of ration packs, freeze-dried food that you've got to pour boiling water into, which are fine, totally fine. But it is that fear of running out, which was there for the whole first half of the trip, because at the beginning, in that 8-day whiteout, in the 8-day storm, I was super behind schedule. I was trying to ski into like winds gusting 50, 60 knots. So I got about maybe 6 or 7 days behind schedule at that point. So then you've got that constant anxiety and fear that, have I got enough fuel to melt snow and ice on my stove for drinking water? Have I got enough food to last me to the pole? So I made the call maybe just before halfway to get a resupply. So the logistics company would fly in, drop a bag of food, where they dug a hole, put it in a hole, put a flag on it, and then I found it on my route along. And I'm so glad I did that. Like if I hadn't have done that, I could have said my expedition was unsupported, which is one of those words you can use if you don't get resupplies along the way. But giving that up and getting the resupply and being relaxed for the rest of the trip and not rushing to the end was the best decision I ever made.
Definitely. And this question could either be really stupid or actually could have an interesting answer. How are you navigating towards the South Pole? Are you holding a compass walking towards south, or is it any more complex than that?
Only slightly. So I've got a GPS where we've put in the few waypoints. There's maybe 6 or 7 of them for the 700-mile stretch. So some of them are like 100 miles apart. Some are maybe 20 miles apart in the kind of more dangerous crevassed areas. So I look on my GPS, I find the bearing, I plug that bearing into my compass, which sits on like a chest mount in front of me, because I've got my hands on ski poles. And I've just got to stare at the compass, get the arrow in the box all day long. So in the whiteout, it was interesting. When you're just staring down at this compass, trying to stay in a straight line, because it's so don't want to go off. You don't want to go any further than you need to. Yeah, exactly. And that area at the beginning where I was in the whiteout, there was quite a bit of crevassing. So you wanted to avoid that as much as you can. Following the compass all the way.
What was the most dangerous thing about that journey? Was it the cold and supplies and stuff like that, or was there anything about the terrain that would have been dangerous?
The terrain, the main things would be crevassing, which happen closer to mountain ranges. So at the beginning, there's a little bit, but if you navigate well on the GPS bearings, you can avoid it. It was harder in the whiteout and scarier.
Every single step.
More than a meter. But it was okay, made it through. But I think that the biggest danger is, it has to be the elements, but the elements are reasonably controllable. I think the biggest danger is not being on it, mentally. If you're not on it and you push yourself too hard one day, or you take risks, then that's when it's going to get you. There was maybe only one day where I decided not to ski, and it was in that 8-day storm, and it was maybe minus 45 with wind chill, and it was gusting 60 knots. And the scariest thing is taking your tent down in the morning and pitching it in the evening, because when it's gusting that strong, if you let go of that tent, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. And if you lose your tent, you're pretty screwed. there's no shelter, and in that storm,
That'd be the end.
rescue will be really hard. So yeah, the scariest part was putting my tent up and down, securing it onto my sled, like doubly clipping it on. Yeah.
Was there a point where you just wanted to stop, or you thought you wouldn't be able to do it?
It's not really. I never really wanted to stop. But
You want to stop,
I
but you
wanted
never
to,
really
yeah.
want to stop. I get that, yeah.
I guess there was a bit of after the storm, and when I realised I was 6-7 days behind schedule, that was the only time I think in my whole life of these expeditions where I felt like this big black cloud kind of sitting on me, and all of these really negative thoughts like, what on earth are you doing down here? Has your ego pushed you down here? Like, why on earth do you think you could survive for 2 months in Antarctica? And I think it was kind of the trauma of the first week and a half in the storm. But once I managed to sort my head out and focus again, which is so much harder when you don't have a team around you,
Yeah.
no one to give you a hug, no one to have a laugh with. But once I managed to get through that mindset change, I started making better decisions, and things were good from then.
Yeah, the self-discipline really strikes out to me. To have that, like you said earlier, hour and a half, 10 minutes. And if you break that, it's just 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden it becomes a bigger issue. So your self-drive and motivation must be unbelievable. So I
mean,
commend
it's not,
that.
in normal life, it's absolutely not like that. And I think it's something I learned quickly in Antarctica.
I mean, we focused on these two adventures you've done. I'd love for you to just kind of list a few of the other adventures. And then after that, a lot of people, I hear this when people talk about water, but when they have an interaction with the water or they go on adventures, they come back with a massive respect and appreciation of that element, part of the world, part of nature. Is it a similar thing with you in these adventures?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you are in any kind of environment and it's bigger than you and it's so much stronger than you, it's so vast, that respect is there, and it has to be there. And I think I got so much more respect for mountains, so much more respect for polar regions, but also any environment where we're so fragile as humans. Like, we're made up of like flesh and blood, and we're so easy for us to get into trouble and get hurt, and our bodies are actually so weak. And the world is so strong, and the environment and the weather conditions are so strong. So you have to have an unbelievable amount of respect for it.
Definitely. So what are some of the other bits and pieces that you've done? I could list other places that you've been.
So it's lots of climbing in back to Africa a few times.
Yeah.
North Africa, East Africa, South America. Did a desert expedition once in Jordan, which was like 2 weeks of hiking, pretty much unsupported, which was hell. I'm definitely a cold weather person.
Well, it was minus 45 degrees in
Antarctica, yeah.
Wow.
But plus 35 in Jordan. I couldn't
Very
hack
different.
it. Yep.
Nice.
Spent time in Greenland, spent time in the Alps, then living in Scotland. I now run an adventure company. So it's called Ocean Vertical.
Yeah.
We take people into the ocean in the summer, paddleboarding, surfing, coast steering, and then in the winter we head up to the Highlands and do mountaineering in the Highlands.
Oh, that's so cool.
So yeah, loads of adventure around Scotland.
Definitely. And the question leading off from that is, be interested to know the best moment you've had on any adventure, and then the hardest moment that you've had on any adventure. You can take
question.
best and hardest in any kind of fashion, whether physically or mentally.
I guess with the best, there's so many. Like, every single day you go out in the mountains or the ocean, you have incredible experiences. But I think the one that springs to mind and will always stay with me is a day in Antarctica. It was maybe like day 49, 50. No, maybe like 50. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But
around the late period, yeah.
It all blurred into one at the end. But I was close to the end. And it was a day where it was a strange day, because I woke up and there was no sound whatsoever. And in Antarctica, there's always noise around you. It's always windy. The wind's always blowing pretty strong. Your skis scrape along as you ski. Your tent shakes. Your clothes scrape against each other. Your sled scrapes behind you. So there's always noise. And this day, I remember sitting down on my sled and just looking around me and realizing that something was missing. And it took me a little while to work out what was missing and why this day felt so strange. And I realized that there was no wind, not even a breath of wind that day. And it had been super windy the whole expedition. And with that lack of wind, when I sat down still, there was just absolute silence. Like this unbelievable, deafening silence. And there was no one around me for, 100 miles or something. And for me, I think it was probably the quietest place in the world that day, with absolutely no wind, no people around, no life around. That was incredible, really, really incredible.
Wow, amazing. And then the most difficult moment?
There's been so many.
Yeah.
Been so many. Probably on Everest.
Yeah.
The majority of Everest was really hard.
That first time.
I think coming down the descent on the first time was really hard because we managed to get up there and summit quite early, but that meant we met all the queues on the way down, and we met them at the worst possible place on the Hillary Steps. It was myself and my Sherpa guide Lakpa, and we kind of got stuck on the Hillary Step for maybe an hour and a half, going on 2 hours, trying to slowly push our way down past these crowds. Oxygen ran out, nearly died. Lakpa saved me. Yep. That was probably the best moment.
Yeah, I suppose nearly dying would be up there. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So what's next for you? What's the next adventure? What can you talk about? What's the next challenge?
Good question, and one I always get. But there's no huge expedition on the horizon, which actually feels quite nice. I think Antarctica took so much from me. And getting back from that, we were straight into COVID and lockdown and everything. So travel wasn't an option for a couple of years there. So instead of traveling, I spent my time in Scotland. And I've just written a book, which is about the blue spaces of Scotland. So the ocean, the lochs, the rivers, the canals, for doing water sports. So for surfing, kayaking, wild swimming, paddleboarding. And it's a guidebook to 65 of my favourite locations, from the Outer Hebrides to huge highland lochs at like 700 metres to
so cool.
City centre, blue spaces. And it's got the theme of blue health running through it, how we need these blue spaces for our mental health. So that's just come out at the beginning of September. So working on promo of that at the moment, which is,
that sounds like, that's really cool. That's really cool.
It's nice to ground a little bit more in Scotland and explore more.
Yeah, and encouraging people to get outside, that tie with mental health as well, and why it's so important. So, it's amazing. Yeah,
I spent a lot of the last 10 years doing trips myself. Amazing trips, and I'm so lucky to have seen the places I have, but it's nice to share them a little bit more now.
And inspire people.
Yeah, I hope so.
Definitely. And kind of leading on from that, I offered you a piece of advice from Laura at the beginning. It's now your turn. It can be about adventure. It can be about you. It can be about anything. So it's a piece of advice to offer the next guest on the podcast.
Good question. And I think it has to be to aim big and aim high. And once you get that ambition, that one thing you want to do, like for me, it was climbing Everest when I was 21. It felt huge. It felt unachievable. But then working out a route and a plan to get there and breaking that down. So I think it has to be aim high and then decide how you're going to get there.
I love that. Mollie, it's genuinely been very inspiring and interesting talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.